Last video we created our tutorial demo function, and in this video we're going to talk about function configurations. So when you create a function, you're going to notice that there are about 5 tabs. The first tab that you're going to see is the configurations tab. I'm going to click into it. Now this tag has a few configurations that we would like to address with this video. The first section, or the first thing you notice here, that there is an editable by non-author option. By default, all functions on the in-house platform are editable by anyone in an organization, anyone with a license to an account. But if you want a certain function to only be accessible to you with regards to being able to edit or update said function, all you would need to do is toggle this. Now that this is toggled off, you are the only one who's allowed to update this function. No one else can work on this function. I'm gonna toggle this back on. The next option here is to make the function visible to external users. So by default, all functions are only visible to users in an account. So only people in your organization will have access to functions on the in-house cloud platform. But if you are working or if you are collaborating with a third party, so let's say you have a web app that you and people outside of your account have been invited to work on in a collaborative manner, you can indeed expose certain functions to third parties. And functions that third parties write are by default visible to external users. So if I were to toggle this on, then this function will be available to anyone that I have invited to work on to collaborate on a project with. So that's what this is. So if you indeed create a web app and you want people from outside of your account to collaborate with you on that application, all you would need to do is go to all the functions that you would like them to have access to and toggle on the visible to external users uh, switch button. Now the third option here is restrict access. So in this case, we have this function editable by non-author. So anyone in my organization can edit this function. But what if I wanted to restrict access within my organization? All I need to do is toggle this on and basically specify what permissions I would like to have read access and what permissions I would like to have write access. And you could select as many of these and you can mix and match as many of these as you want. This is a pretty straightforward concept. Now, anyone, right, that has the set permissions will be able to carry out said actions. So if, let's say this is a restricted function and you only want people with database admin and database developer permissions to be able to see this function, then what happens is that this function will not show up on the function builder to anybody outside of these permissions. Now, this function will still be available for use in APIs, in web apps, for everybody, in the organization. But from a perspective of being visible in the function builder, from the perspective of being able to see the function's logic, and from the perspective of being able to see the details, uh, it would only be restricted. It will be restricted to people with the allocated permissions. So we're going to remove this because we don't want to implement this. Now, the third thing we notice here is versions. So as you can see, we have one version. I've made a few changes. If I clicked on save, now I have 2 versions. So this is what we call version control. So with everything on the platform, from web apps to APIs to automations to functions to uh, SaaS billing subscription services. Every single thing on the platform has version control. So version control makes it possible to be able to bounce back and forth between different versions at different times. Whenever you save an update, it's saved as a separate version. So you can always go back and forth and make any given version the active version. So whenever I make a change, like I just did, I have an active version. That active version is the next version. I could always revert and make a previous version the active version, or I could go back to the current version and make that the active version. I can switch back and forth between versions with ease. So now there's something called deployed version. So when we use when we use functions on the in-house cloud platform, we are using the deployed version. So whenever you're using a function in a web app in an API automation, the system only selects the deployed version. So if you make changes to your functions and everything, you need to deploy the version that you want to. You need to deploy the version, right? The active version, and then uh, the version will be the functions used across the application will reference that version. So that's basically how the version control works. Remember, whenever you make a change, whenever you make updates, it is saved as a new version. To consume this new version in your web apps, APIs, automations, and everywhere else, you would need to deploy said version. And you can bounce around between different versions with ease. Okay, so that's all you need to know about the version control and how it works. It's very easy. The deploy active version button, all it's doing is deploying whatever version is set as the active version. So what happens when let's say you use a function in a web app and you've deployed this app to production, then you come back and you make changes to the function. Do you have to go back to said web app and update the function in that web app? No, you don't. In-house cloud platform has a smart sync that syncs functions across all resources that consume said function. So if I have a function used in a web application or in an API, I do not need to go back to that API, right, to update anything. All I would need to do is update my function, and every single place that that function is referenced will get the automatic update. There will be a shadow redeployment that basically updates the function. So, because you're going to run into situations where you're going to use one function in maybe 30, 40 different places, and it's not possible to go to every single place and make changes to your function or to those applications to reflect the changes in your function. So you basically build one time, you connect your function to these resources, and whenever your function updates, all these resources will get the update as well. So it makes your life so much easier. And finally, delete a function. Now, this basically just does something very simple. It deletes your function. But keep in mind that you do not want to delete functions that are in use in other applications, because whenever you were to redeploy said application, the function will be missing, right? And you never know how deleting a function will affect an application that is currently consuming that function. So you always want to keep that in mind before you delete a function. You only delete functions that you're sure are not being used anywhere else. All right. And that's it about configurations. Very simple. Let's do a quick recap. The first thing here is basically you can decide or you can determine if you want this function to be editable by anyone else in your organization. By default, this is allowed. You can decide if you want a function to be available to third-party users. By default, all functions are private within your organization. You can decide if you want to restrict access within your organization. So, a function is editable by others, but you want to restrict the others. We have version control where we can switch back and forth between different versions. We understand that whenever we make a change, whenever we update our function, it is saved as a new version. We do understand that the version of our function that is consumed in resources like web apps, APIs, and automations are the deployed version. So whenever we make a change to a function, this change will not be reflected in anywhere we consume this function until we deploy the version. And finally, we understand that we can delete functions very easily, but we also have to keep in mind that we need to make sure that these functions are not being used anywhere else because they will affect the behavior of your resources if the function is not available. All right. And with this, we'll wrap up this video and I'll see you in the next video.